Hey everyone, I'm back with another episode of Chinese History Legendary Figure Painting. And today I am finally addressing the hands down most famous classical Chinese heroine in the world, Mulan. With the new Disney remake coming out this month and everyone talking about all the changes that they've made, I just want you guys to stay tuned and get the scoop on how Mulan even got to this point in the first place. I'm Regina Linke, and today we are talking all things Mulan. Before we get to it, don't forget to subscribe. I'm back again painting more badass women and Chinese history and sharing their stories right here. So hit the button below to subscribe. Okay, so today we are talking about Mulan. She is the most famous heroine exported out of classical China straight into your local movie theaters. Now, Disney's new live-action remake of Mulan comes out at the end of the month, and ever since the first teaser trailer came out last year, I've been hearing so many opinions across the internet and from friends who grew up on the animated version about there being no songs in this version and missing Cricky and Mushu, about the lack of any apparent love interest. So today we're breaking down the evolution of Mulan's story by answering 5 big questions. So we're going to kick things off with question 1. Was Mulan a real person? The short story is probably not. It's largely believed that Mulan is a fictional character who has over time taken on legendary proportions. Like me, you might be kind of disappointed. When I hear of women warriors in Chinese folklore, I desperately want to believe that they were real people, that they had these incredible origin stories in which they defied the bounds of their social status as women and proved their genius for warfare against those who were physically stronger than they were. So I have to constantly remind myself that just because these women like Mulan might not have actually existed doesn't reduce the impact of their story any less. It actually allowed, in Mulan's case, for her story to evolve and change with the times, which I think is kind of neat. And so we'll cover that in some of the follow-up questions. Question 2, where did Mulan come from? The earliest record of Mulan comes from a folk song called The Ballad of Mulan, which was transcribed during the Northern Wei dynasty more than 1,500 years ago. The original work doesn't exist anymore, but the text of the poem was eventually found in an anthology of songs, poems, and lyrics called the Musical Bureau Collection, and it was recorded sometime in the 11th or 12th centuries. The author actually cites another work, an earlier work called Musical Records of Old and New, as his source for the Ballad of Mulan lyrics. Question 3, what is in the original Mulan? Now, the Ballad of Mulan is actually really, really short. It's only 360 words long, and if you think about the average reading speed for a native English speaker is 300 words per minute, you can basically start and finish the original story of Mulan relatively quickly. But the basic story goes like this. Mulan is weaving at her loom, and she learns that invaders have led to a conscription of males from all households to go and fight. So this storyline has been relatively constant over the years. And so in this case, without an older brother, so she doesn't have an older brother and she has a really elderly father, Mulan decides to take some money and purchase a horse, a saddle, and some weapons, and basically go to battle. She rides away at dawn and continues for thousands of miles, following the army through hundreds of battles for, get this, 10 years. She is then finally, at the end of all of these campaigns, brought before the emperor, and she is asked what she wants as a reward for her decade of service. And refusing a gentleman's post as a government official, Mulan requests only a swift steed to take her home. And the rest of the poem basically tells about her family welcoming her back, and in the end she trades her battle armor for her old clothes and her old makeup. And stepping outside once more, she surprises her comrades in arms and reveals that she was a woman all along. And the poem actually ends with this couplet asking, when two rabbits run side by side, how can you tell the female from the male? So it poses that rhetorical question at the end. Now, so much of the original poem is dedicated to Mulan's background and her journey into the army, as well as her return home and her surprising reveal. The poem itself doesn't actually give any details about the part in between these two important bookends, and it makes us wonder what actually happened in the 10 years that she was away. The poem leaves all of her military training, the battles she fought, her victories and exploits, her potential defeats, to the imagination of the listener, which is precisely what has given it such potential to grow and evolve as a legend. So question 4. How did the story of Mulan change over time? So we start with a song that barely makes 2 minutes to a plot that ultimately needs to drive a full-length feature movie with a 2-hour runtime and no music. This didn't just happen overnight. As we covered before, the song was recorded during the 6th century, again in the 11th or 12th century, and then after that it was later picked up during the Qing dynasty in 1695, where the basic story was fleshed out into what is now known as the Sui Tong romance. Now in this version of the story, Mulan has the same background, but the author has added a number of adventures after leaving home, including Mulan becoming sworn sisters with the emperor's daughter, who happened to also be a woman in the military. And the two of them basically go into a number of battles, and at one point even offer to trade places with the emperor and his men when they're captured. And basically at the end, to reward her for her loyalty, the emperor offers Mulan's family a large sum of money. So Mulan returns home with all of this glory, only to discover that her father has died in the intervening time, and her mother has remarried, giving Mulan basically nowhere to go as a single woman. So she instead is ordered to marry some dude as his concubine, and instead of resigning herself to this fate, Mulan actually ends up taking her own life. So the Sui Tong romance is indeed a tragedy. The tragedy of Mulan and the many variations of it have been acted out on stage and in operas. And it wasn't until 1927 that the story made its jump to the silver screen with the silent film Hua Mulan Joins the Army. And this is where the story actually takes on a happier tone and has a happier ending. So this story was made during the turbulent years of China's existence as a nascent republic. The Qing dynasty had fallen, and the country was really struggling with civil strife while simultaneously resisting Japanese invasion at the time. And so Mulan became this popular figure of patriotism and national identity that really helped rally and unite the Chinese people's spirit. Her story was so powerful that Chinese cinema actually remade it in 1939 during World War II, kind of this continuation of the war of resistance against Japanese invasion. And it continued to resonate with the Chinese as a call to rise up against outside invaders, essentially. Now, in these movies, the story of Mulan's exploits on the battlefield take on more and more legendary proportions. I mean, she unroots corruption, she acts as a spy, she ends up leading armies and taking over as a general. And this is no different than what Disney has done and will likely do in this year's release. Now, in the animated version, Mulan decimates the Han army and subverts an assassination attempt against the emperor and is able to defeat the barbarian leader in hand-to-hand combat. But and based on the new trailers for this year's remake, it looks like she's got this shape-shifting witch on her hands as well. So question 5, what do I think about Mulan? When I consider where Mulan's story originates, I imagine the story working out very differently. I mean, she's technically not Han Chinese, but rather kind of a Turco-Mongol ethnicity that served during the Northern Wei dynasty. So at the time of the Northern Wei, this empire basically already had a significant history of warring with other clans and was constantly under attack by their neighbors to the north, which were the Roaring Cognate. And so defense on the northern border was a huge priority for the Northern Wei, and military duty was considered honored service and was given high recognition. And so this would explain why Mulan, though being a woman, had sufficient training to excel as a soldier, and why after 10 years of service, she did ultimately bring high honors to her family and earn the respect of her generals as well as her peers. But what I find most fascinating about Mulan's story is not necessarily all of her exploits and what happened during her time in the army. Obviously, that's very inspiring. But if anything, I'm actually drawn more to the end of the poem when Mulan comes back home and puts on her old clothes again. And I wonder what must have been going through her mind as she was doing that. I mean, was she happy to return to the same life after being away for so long? I don't come from a military family, but I hear and read about how difficult the transition is for servicemen and women when they return to civilian life. And I wonder how that might have been like for Mulan. And I think about the freedoms that she must have enjoyed and grown used to under a man's disguise, and her life of a soldier and the violence and the brutality she must have seen day to day for so long. And it really makes me ask, how does one go from doing that for 10 years to assuming what I can only imagine to be the role of a very submissive woman whose life is confined to basically all things domestic. That to me seems like the more interesting part of Mulan's story. And under that lens, her suicide in the Sui Tong romance when she was forced to become a concubine doesn't actually sound all that strange anymore. So what I want to know is, what do you think? Have you seen the new trailers for the live action Mulan? If you have, leave a comment below and let me know if you're excited to see it. I certainly am, so thanks for watching.